I helped build a company's biggest projects. Then my toxic boss took credit for everything. After he got fired, he started his own agency using my work as his portfolio. What happened next was something he never saw coming. Before going to forward in the story, please subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. For a while, I worked as a web designer in a small ad agency serving a very niche industry. Previously, the design team had no creative lead and were all sort of operating independently across varying clients. We decided to hire a creative director to fill that gap, and I was given the task of sorting through and giving first-round interviews to find the person who would later become my supervisor. Two candidates in particular stood out from the rest for very different reasons. One was exceptionally talented, an all-around nice guy, and somebody who generally would have been great for the role. The other, let's call him John, had mediocre talents, came across as an insufferable, arrogant prick, but had previous experience working within the niche industry that we serviced. He also had contacts within that industry that could lead to new business. Despite my strong recommendation to not hire John, his relationships in the industry were too compelling to our agency's leadership to pass up, and they hired him. It didn't take long before the entire company started to realize John was a huge burden. He had virtually zero experience in anything related to digital design. Design for apps, websites, mobile, etc. were all completely and utterly beyond his grasp. But he used his position of relative power to make decisions on those projects that the entire design team refused to support, most of which came back to bite the company in the ass later. The design team hated him because fixing and working around his screw-ups became part of our daily routine. The sales team hated him because he'd claim it took him unbelievably exaggerated amounts of time to complete even the most trivial of tasks, like 4 days to design a business card template, so they wouldn't even assign him projects anymore. Work that was clearly his responsibility started to rapidly trickle down to the rest of the design team. We'd be working late nights 4 out of 5 days a week because all of his projects that were in danger of missing deadlines would be reassigned to us. Meanwhile, he'd be the first to walk out the door every day, right at 5 p.m., without fail. On top of all that, the guy was absolutely, without a doubt, the biggest tool I've ever met. Always right about everything, completely unbending on his idiotic opinions, and completely clueless that literally every person in the building wished he would get hit by a truck. I genuinely tried to work with him for about a year, until I decided that the job had become intolerable because of him and wasn't going to change anytime soon, so I turned in my 2-week notice. About a month after I left, I heard that he had been let go from the job. Shortly after that, I noticed that he had changed his LinkedIn status to show that he was working for a new agency I had never heard of, also servicing that same niche industry. I looked them up and quickly figured out that he had started his own agency, a primarily digital agency, when he had no experience in digital or interactive design and had literally fucked up every digital or interactive project he'd ever been on. I know because most of them were reassigned to me when he proved incapable of doing them himself. I looked at the portfolio on his website and found literally project after project of my work. He was using my work from the ad agency as examples of the work his agency could produce. I briefly considered contacting him and requesting he remove my work from his portfolio for ethical reasons, but I could already hear his reply in my head. As creative lead, all work done by my team is an extension of my creative direction. He'd used similar lines in the past to insert himself into receiving credit on successful projects he'd had zero involvement on. So, instead, I sent an email to one of the partners of the agency we both had worked for, saying something along the lines of, "Hey, not sure if you've noticed this, but it looks like John is using your company's intellectual property to directly compete against you." At first, we tried really hard to stay positive. Every new manager needs time, right? Maybe Rick was just loud because he was nervous. Maybe he was trying too hard to impress everyone. We told ourselves that once he understood how the company worked, he'd calm down and start listening to the team. That never happened. Instead, he doubled down on everything that made him unbearable. About 2 months after he joined, we signed a huge client. This wasn't just a small business website. This was a big company with money, reputation, and influence in our industry. Everyone knew this project could either make us or break us. Rick insisted that he personally lead the design. He scheduled a kickoff meeting with the client and talked for almost the entire hour. He kept using words like disruptive, next gen, and visionary. The client seemed impressed. Our CEO looked proud. Meanwhile, the design team was quietly panicking. Rick decided to throw out our entire design process. Normally, we started with research. We interviewed users, mapped flows, made simple wireframes, tested them, then built the final design. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Rick skipped all of that. He jumped straight into flashy mock-ups with crazy animations, floating panels, custom gestures, and complex transitions. They looked like something from a sci-fi movie. They also had nothing to do with what users actually needed. When developers saw the designs, they nearly lost their minds. They told Rick it would take months to build what he was proposing. The clients had given us a strict deadline of 6 weeks. Rick just smiled and said, "Great things take time." We tried to warn him. I carefully said in a meeting that some of the features might be too complex for the timeline, and maybe we should simplify things. He looked at me like I had personally insulted him and said, "Good designers push boundaries. Engineers catch up later." The room went dead silent. As the weeks went by, everything started falling apart. Developers were buried in impossible tasks. Designers were working late nights trying to clean up his messy files. The clients kept asking for demos, and we barely had anything stable to show them. Rick kept promising features that didn't exist. He'd casually tell the client we're building an AI-powered dashboard and real-time adaptive UI. None of that was real. We were struggling to make basic screens work. 2 weeks before launch, the CEO called an emergency meeting. The project was nowhere near ready. The client was angry. Everyone was stressed. Rick stood up in that meeting and blamed us. He said the design team couldn't execute his vision. He said we lacked discipline. He said we needed stronger technical skills. I felt sick. We had been working ourselves to exhaustion trying to fix his mistakes, and he threw us under the bus without hesitation. Leadership believed him. He was confident, loud, and connected. We were quiet designers who looked tired and defensive. We were put into performance review meetings. We had to write long explanations about missed deadlines. We worked weekends and nights to rebuild the project into something that could actually launch. Rick still left at 5 p.m. every day. One night, I was still in the office at almost 11 p.m. with 2 other designers. We were exporting assets, fixing spacing, and rewriting documentation so developers could understand the chaos. I opened LinkedIn to take a break. Rick had posted again. "Proud of my team for executing my design strategy for client name. Leadership is vision and trust." I stared at the screen and felt something break inside me. We were destroying our health to clean up his mess, and he was using it to build his personal brand. That was the moment I realized this job was never going to get better as long as he was here, and I started thinking seriously about leaving. After that big project, something in me changed. Before Rick, I actually liked my job. I liked my coworkers. I liked the work. Even the stress felt meaningful, like we were building something important. But now, every day felt heavy. I woke up tired. I dreaded Slack notifications. I felt angry all the time. And Rick just kept getting worse. He started disappearing. At first, we thought he was busy in meetings or working on strategy, but slowly we realized he wasn't actually doing much of anything. He'd show up late, wander around the office talking loudly about big picture ideas, and then vanish into meeting rooms or go out for long lunches. Meanwhile, all of his actual responsibilities quietly landed on us. He was supposed to manage design schedules, review work, and coordinate with product. Instead, he'd just forward emails to us and say, "Handle this." We were basically doing his job for him. Then, we discovered he was outsourcing work behind everyone's back. One day, I opened a shared design file and saw strange comments and changes made by someone I didn't recognize. The email wasn't from our company domain. At first, I thought it was a new contractor, but no one had mentioned hiring anyone. I asked around. No one knew who it was. Eventually, I asked Rick directly. He casually admitted he had hired a freelance designer overseas to speed things up. He never told leadership, he never told the team. He was paying them from some personal arrangement and then presenting their work as his own leadership. It felt shady, but no one wanted to confront him because leadership still loved him. Then came the worst part. We launched a new internal tool for small businesses. I had spent weeks designing it. I did the research, the wireframes, the prototypes, everything. I even worked closely with developers to make sure it was feasible. Rick barely touched it. But on launch day, he called a meeting with leadership and presented the entire thing as his concept. He showed my designs on the big screen and said, I came up with this approach after noticing gaps in the market. I directed the team to execute this vision. He didn't even mention my name. The CEO congratulated him. The investors congratulated him. He got praised in the company newsletter. I sat there quietly, staring at my laptop, feeling invisible. That night, I opened LinkedIn again. He had posted a long article about how he led the design of the tool, how his leadership philosophy shaped the product, how his strategy created business impact. He attached screenshots of my designs, my work, his name. I felt sick. That was when I started planning my exit for real. I updated my portfolio, I started applying for jobs quietly, I stopped volunteering for extra tasks. But Rick wasn't done. He started openly criticizing me in meetings. If something was delayed, he'd say, "This is why we need stronger designers." If a developer complained, he'd say, "Design should have caught that." Even when it was clearly his fault, he redirected blame. One day, during a sprint review, he pointed at one of my screens and said, "This could be better. We'll need to rework this. The team is still maturing." In front of everyone. I had never felt so humiliated at work. My coworkers started quitting. One designer left for a competitor, another switched teams internally. The junior designer started crying in the bathroom from stress. Leadership noticed turnover, but somehow never connected it to Rick. By the time I handed in my resignation, I felt nothing but relief. 2 weeks later, I walked out of that office for the last time. I thought the nightmare was over. I was wrong. I thought leaving that company would be the end of Rick in my life. For a while, it was. I started a new job at a calmer company with a real design team and a manager who actually understood UX and respected designers. For the first few months, I barely thought about my old workplace. It felt like escaping a toxic relationship. I slept better, I stopped checking Slack at night, I started enjoying design again. Then, one day, I got a message from an old coworker. It was just a short text. "Did you hear? Rick got fired." I stared at my phone for a long time. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt angry that it took so long. The damage was already done. Half the design team had quit, the big client relationship was strained, and morale had collapsed. Apparently, leadership finally realized he wasn't delivering anything. His promises didn't match results. His vision wasn't backed by actual execution. And once his investor friend distanced himself, Rick's shield disappeared. So they let him go. I didn't celebrate, but I felt some quiet justice. A few months later, I was scrolling LinkedIn during lunch when I saw his profile pop up. He had updated his title, founder and creative director at Nova Forge Studio. I had never heard of Nova Forge Studio. Curious, I clicked. The company page looked polished, slick branding, confident language, lots of buzzwords about innovation, digital transformation, and creative excellence. It claimed to be a full-service digital agency specializing in niche industry clients, the same niche industry we had worked in. I felt a weird mix of dread and curiosity, so I clicked the website. At first, I was impressed. The site looked good, clean layout, modern typography, decent UX. For someone who struggled to understand responsive design, it was surprisingly competent. Then I opened the portfolio, and my stomach dropped. The first project case study looked very familiar because I designed it. It was the big internal tool we had launched, the one he took credit for in meetings. The screenshots were exactly my designs. The flow diagrams were copied from the documentation I wrote. The copy was lightly edited but clearly lifted from internal presentations. He listed it as designed and executed by NovaForge Studio for a major industry client. There was no mention of the old company, no mention of the actual team, no mention of me. I clicked another project. That one was mine. Then another, and another. Nearly every flagship project on his agency website was work we had done at the old company. Work I had done, work my teammates had done, work that belonged to that agency. He was presenting it as if his new agency had produced all of it. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling this strange mix of anger, disbelief, and dark amusement. This man had no digital design skills. He had no real agency team. He had been fired for incompetence. And now he was pretending to be the founder of a digital agency using stolen work to attract clients. I considered messaging him. I imagined how the conversation would go. I'd say something like, "Hey, I noticed you're using projects from our old company in your portfolio. Those weren't yours to use, and many of them were my designs." And I could already hear his response. As creative director, I was responsible for the team's output. The work reflects my creative leadership. It's part of my legacy. He had used that exact argument before. Whenever something good happened, he'd say it was his vision. Whenever something bad happened, it was the team's fault. I knew he would never admit wrongdoing. So instead, I did something else. I emailed one of the partners at our old agency. I kept it calm and professional. I said something like, "Hey, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but Rick has started his own agency and is using projects from your company as portfolio examples. It looks like he's presenting them as his agency's work. You might want to look into it, especially since he's targeting the same clients." I didn't threaten, I didn't accuse, I just pointed it out. Then I waited. A week later, the partner replied. He thanked me and said they were aware of Rick's new company, but hadn't looked closely at his site. He said they'd talk to legal and see what their options were. I never heard anything after that, but I kept watching Rick's LinkedIn out of pure curiosity. He started posting constantly. He talked about entrepreneurship, leadership, and how corporate environments stifle creativity. He framed himself as a visionary who left to build something better. He posted screenshots of his agency's work, my work. He started announcing new clients, small ones mostly, companies in the same niche industry that probably recognized the designs and assumed he had done that work before. I realized something unsettling. He might actually succeed, not because he was talented, not because he was ethical, but because people believe confidence and presentation more than truth. One day, he posted a long article about building a design team from scratch. He talked about mentoring designers, building systems, and creating a culture of excellence. I laughed out loud. He had destroyed a design team. He had taken credit for others' work. He had blamed and humiliated people publicly, and now he was rewriting. For a while, I tried to forget about Rick and his fake agency. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I had a new job, better pay, a healthier team, and a manager who actually listened. I didn't owe my old company anything. I didn't owe Rick anything. But then things started getting weird. A few months after Nova Forge Studio launched, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone I didn't know. Hey, this might sound random, but did you work on the big client platform redesign a couple of years ago? I'm interviewing at a company that claims they built it, and I wanted to verify. My heart dropped. I clicked his profile. He was a junior designer, fresh out of school, and he had just interviewed at Nova Forge Studio, Rick's company. I replied honestly. I said, yes, I worked on that project at my previous company. That agency didn't build it. It was done by the in-house design team where I used to work. He thanked me and said something that stuck with me. That's strange. Rick told me he personally led that project at his agency and that they did the full design and strategy. I just stared at my screen. He wasn't just using the work as portfolio material. He was actively lying to people about who built it. Around the same time, I heard from a former coworker that Rick had started contacting old clients. Not directly at first. He'd send friendly messages like, "Hey, it's been a while. I've started my own agency focused on digital transformation. Would love to catch up." Some clients replied out of curiosity, some ignored him, but a few actually took meetings. One of those clients had worked very closely with me on a product feature. They emailed me directly. "Hey, random question. Rick reached out and showed us some of the designs you worked on. He says his agency created them. We were confused. Are you working with him now?" I had to sit down. I explained the situation carefully. I said Rick used to work at the same company, but the work was done by the internal design team. I said I wasn't affiliated with his new agency. The client sounded surprised. They said Rick had pitched them a full digital overhaul, claiming his agency had deep technical experience. He showed case studies that were either stolen or exaggerated. Once the contract started, everything broke down. Deadlines slipped, designs didn't match reality, developers they hired complained the files were unusable. Eventually, they canceled the contract and lost a lot of money in the process. They said they were considering legal action. I don't know if they ever did. But after that, Rick's LinkedIn activity changed. He stopped posting big wins. He started posting vague reflections about entrepreneurial challenges. He talked about resilience, failure, and lessons learned. Nova Forge's website started looking quieter. One day, out of curiosity, I tried to open his site. It was down. The domain still existed, but the content was gone. A few weeks later, his LinkedIn title changed. He was no longer founder and creative director. He was now a design consultant at another small agency. Not his agency, someone else's. I never contacted him. He never contacted me. We never spoke again. But watching his rise and slow fall taught me a lot. For a long time, I felt angry. I felt robbed. I felt like my work had been stolen and my effort erased. I felt like someone incompetent had climbed on top of other people's labor and tried to build a reputation on it. But over time, that anger faded. I realized something simple. You can fake a portfolio. You can fake confidence. You can fake leadership for a while, but you can't fake competence forever. At some point, reality catches up. Clients notice, teams burn out, reputation cracks. I also learned something about myself. I used to think being quiet, collaborative, and honest put me at a disadvantage. People like Rick seemed to win by being loud and shameless. But in the long run, quiet consistency mattered more. My work was real. My skills were real. My relationships were real. Rick's were built on smoke. Sometimes I still think about that version of me working late nights, fixing his mistakes, watching him take credit, feeling invisible. If I could talk to that version of myself, I'd say this: leave sooner. Document everything. Don't let someone else's ego define your worth. And if you're reading this and working under someone like Rick, here's the hard truth. They probably won't change. They'll probably keep taking credit. They'll probably keep blaming others. But their house of cards will eventually wobble. And when it falls, you'll still be standing. That's the story of the worst boss I ever had, and the strangest professional revenge I never had to take. Sometimes watching someone face the consequences of their own actions is enough.